I hauled my ass to the laundromat on a typical gray Sunday morning at 7. I had no idea if the day outside my window was gray, but I guess everyone feels that way when they are at the laundromat on a Sunday morning. I've only used a laundromat for the last year or so. Before that, my wife did our laundry, in our own laundry room in the basement of our house. I moved about a year ago, and 6 months ago my wife became my ex-wife, and the laundromat was now located in my former home. So I made a new habit of going to the laundromat located a mile from my apartment early on Sunday mornings. While I don't really like getting up early to do laundry, I didn't want this ritual to disrupt my weekend, so I got to the laundromat early and left early. I avoided the hassle of waiting for a machine on a busy day and the need to possibly engage in polite conversation with other visitors. After all, aren't Sunday mornings meant for hangovers and quietly reading the paper? I'd been going to the same laundromat for the past 9 months or so, and I may have seen her before but never paid attention to her. But this time was different. One of the wheels of the cart she was pulling seemed to be a little bent, causing the cart to roll unsteadily. It was piled high with dirty clothes, and she was having trouble rolling it behind her with one hand and trying to hold the door open with the other. I saw this while looking through the sports paper, and being a generally nice guy, I put the paper aside, walked to the door, and held it open like a gentleman while she pulled the cart inside. She looked up at me and gave me a 100-megawatt smile, with beautiful white teeth and big brown eyes. "Thank you, mister," she said, heading toward the row of washing machines against the far wall of the laundry room. I figured she was about 7 or 8 years old, mixed race, or possibly Hispanic, with a mop of long, curly brown hair. She was just adorable. I turned around, expecting to see my parents walking behind me, but they were gone. Now I was alarmed and intrigued. I watched the child load the entire stack of clothes into the washer, not separating the colored clothes from the white ones like I had been taught. Then she put some laundry detergent she was carrying in her cart, put the money in the machine, and pressed the start button. She took a small teddy bear out of her bag, sat down on a chair, and quietly started talking to it while the washing machine did its work. From my seat, almost on the other side of the laundry room, I could see that the clothes she was wearing, jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a pink jacket too light for a 5-degree morning, had seen better days. While they weren't dirty, they were faded from age and wear. She looked one step better than a street hobo, but there was a calmness to her demeanor that just didn't fit. I also couldn't believe that parents would send such a young child alone to wash the family's clothes. Being a parent myself, I just knew there was something wrong with the whole affair. Which brought me back to my own case. My children at this very moment were probably asleep, snuggled up in their warm, comfy beds in my former home. When they woke up, probably an hour or two later, their mother, my ex-wife, would likely have a hot breakfast of pancakes and eggs and maybe some bacon ready for them. My 13-year-old son, Ethan, is a big fan of bacon, and my 15-year-old daughter, Haley, prefers pancakes. My favorite meal was waffles, but those days of happy Sunday morning breakfasts with my family have become a quickly fading memory. As is customary in a divorce, my wife was awarded custody of the children, and although I was granted some visitation rights, my wife, with all her nastiness, turned the children against me, blaming my selfishness for the destruction of our family. My children wanted nothing to do with me, and this was quite evident in the few times we were together. My crime, not sitting still while my wife made me horny with another man during a long weekend trip with 3 other couples and the man she ended up having sex with, a rich guy who made a habit of having sex with other men's wives. She and he devised this plan to have sex for one night, and then she would come back to me and be completely faithful to me for the rest of our lives, as she had been for the rest of the weekend. Since she told me about it beforehand, it wasn't cheating, she claimed, but just in case I wanted to make a fuss, she would take half my money, half my stuff, the whole house, and, as a nuisance, mess up my relationship with my kids, which of course would go to her. When I said no, she got everything she promised, and of course, she shifted the blame to me. The kids bought it. I was totally screwed. Thinking about those family breakfasts made me hungry, as I hadn't eaten anything since the last sausage had slipped down my throat, along with a Mickey's malt beer at the bar I sat at watching the Knicks game. A poor imitation of a vending machine hung on one wall, with a Coke machine next to it. I was sure whoever owned the laundromat collected money from both machines every day, or they would have been broken into and ruined long ago. I bought a pack of M&Ms and a Diet Coke. Just as I was reaching for the can of Coke, I glanced over at the little girl. She seemed to be quietly watching me, but then I realized she wasn't looking at me but at my snacks. Like I said, I'm someone's father, and the look on her face as she looked at my snacks hurt my heart. I walked over to where she was sitting and quietly asked if she wanted my Diet Coke and M and Ms. She visibly brightened and sat up straight in her chair. Then a sad expression appeared on her face and she declined my offer. "My mom says I shouldn't take food from strangers, especially men," she explained. "That's a very good rule, honey, and you should always listen to what your mommy says," I agreed. "I'll tell you what. I'll just put a soda and M&Ms on the chair next to you, and you can have them if you want them. I'll get myself some more and go back to my seat." I put the food down, went back to the vending machines, and got myself another Diet Coke and another bag of M&Ms. I then went back to my seat and picked up a newspaper, surreptitiously watching her from above. After about 5 minutes, she picked up the soda and M&Ms and got down to business. I smiled to myself. I left about 90 minutes later, folding my 2 bags and putting them in the car. As I left, I didn't think about the baby, immersed in my life and how I was going to spend the rest of Sunday. Honestly, I didn't think about the baby again until I got to the laundromat the next Sunday, again around 7 a.m. Then I wondered if she would show up again. Sure enough, about a half hour later, she came to the door, again dragging a cart piled high with clothes. I held the door for her again, and she thanked me again and headed for the machines against the far wall. I noticed she was wearing the same clothes as last week. I waited for her to start loading, then cautiously walked over and sat down on the seat next to her. "I see you have a problem with the back tire on your wagon, honey. Is it okay if I try to fix it?" She nodded affirmatively, playing with her teddy bear. I turned the wagon over and saw that the back right wheel was bent on the axle. I straightened it with my hands and then rolled the wagon back and forth to check my work. "Instant fix for the wagon." My little friend looked impressed. "I'm Alex Rogers, by the way," I said, extending my hand for a handshake. She extended her small hand with as much dignity as she was capable of and said in a somber voice, "Maddie Ruiz, it's a pleasure to meet you, sir." "Well, now that we've introduced ourselves, we're no longer strangers," I said. "What do you say to a soda and candy?" "Can I get a real Coke this week?" she asked, her eyes wide and questioning. "Sure. 1 real Coke for you, a Diet Coke for me, and some M&Ms for both of us." We sat and chatted for almost 2 hours. I grabbed a notepad and pen from the car and introduced her to a game of tic-tac-toe. It took her about 5 minutes to get the hang of it, but then she started getting the hang of it. I let her win a few times, just like I let my kids win sometimes. For a minute or two, I immersed myself in my own little world, thinking about playing with my kids. Then I sank into thinking about how my then-wife, Tracy, looking me straight in the face, said she was going to sleep with Robert Goldstein III, a big-city lawyer, the night that ended my life as I knew it. "It's just one night, Alex. It won't mean anything. It'll just be sex." "What? Are you kidding me? It won't just be sex. It's going to be the end of our marriage," I yelled back. "Don't be like that, Alex," she yelled back. "Don't throw away 18 years of marriage because of one night. I didn't sneak behind your back like I could have. We could have done this and you probably never would have guessed. Just give it to me, Alex." Tracy took Robert's hand and walked with him to his bedroom in the 4-room cottage. After standing there with my mouth open for what seemed like hours, but probably only a minute, I grabbed my things and left. "Alex, now it's your turn," Maddie said, bringing me back to the present again. I marked an X in one of the side boxes, and that gave Maddie a chance, getting 3 O's in a row diagonally for the win. She made her best triumphant face, marking a line through her triple. "High five, kid," I said, holding my hand out at arm's length from her. She looked at me sideways, then stood up in her chair and was able to reach my hand to complete the high five. "Here you go," she said. I stayed in the laundry room until Maddie's clothes were washed and folded. I offered to give her a ride home, but she said she couldn't accept because it was Mom's rules. "Mom is a smart woman. I'd like to meet her sometime," I said. "Well, maybe someday. She doesn't go out too much," Maddie replied. We continued to chat with Maddie as winter turned into spring and spring turned into summer. I started packing a small bag with sandwiches for both of us and snacks, and bought sodas from the laundromat. At this time of morning, I didn't feel like eating, but I figured if I ate a sandwich, she would too, and she was awfully thin. So I started packing an extra sandwich, telling her she could take an extra one home for her mother. She didn't protest at all and always thanked me. By this time, she had told me that she was really 7 years old and would be a second grader in the fall at our neighborhood elementary school. Her father wasn't home, and in fact, Maddie told me that she had never met her father. Her mother apparently worked part-time outside the home while Maddie went to school, and although she didn't know what her mother did, she was always home by the time Maddie got home from school. Most of the time, she and her mother stayed in their apartment, sometimes going to the park when the weather was nice. Mostly, they watched television, and Maddie was familiar with almost all of the latest animated movies that the children's channel showed. I couldn't name one of them. There didn't seem to be any money for extras, but Mother, on occasion, would go out on Saturday nights, leaving Maddie after dinner with instructions to go to bed at 9 p.m. On Sunday morning, her mother would wake her up, give her money for one washer and one dryer, and send her off with a cart to the laundromat. Truth be told, my life at that point wasn't much better than Maddie's, although I at least had enough money to live on. With alimony, mortgage payments, and child support, my salary as a top programmer didn't leave much money for extra entertainment, usually a casual night out at a bar with friends. I didn't go on dates at all. I didn't miss that. I did, however, miss my kids. At least until I remembered how they treated me after Tracy and I broke up. I preferred to think of happier times with them, but reality always jumped up and bit me. "Where the hell are you?" Tracy screamed when I picked up the phone in my house the morning after I left Robert Goldstein's house on the lake. My phone showed it was 10:06. As far as I could remember, the time was already 2:13 when I tipped another shot of Eagle Rare bourbon into myself. I must have eventually staggered to the bedroom and fell asleep. "You left me to my own devices at the lake house. How do I get home?" She was yelling at me again. "Fuck you, bitch! Let Robert Goldstein III take you home!" I hung up the phone while she yelled something else. Damn, you can't hang up as abruptly with a cell phone as you can with a landline. In the old days, I would have definitely smashed the phone against the wall by throwing it at her. The following Sunday, Maddie showed up at the laundromat 15 minutes later than usual and without her bag of clothes. Tears were streaming down her young face, and I thought she must have been mugged. She was carrying her bear cub, clasping it under her right arm. "Mommy didn't come home last night, and I don't have any money for the washing machines," she said as I approached. "She doesn't come home sometimes?" I asked as gently as possible. She shook her head negatively, her big brown eyes glistening with tears. "Mom always comes home. That's another one of her rules." I calmed her down and gave her the food I had brought with me for her. I was in different territory and didn't know what to do. "Is there someone you can stay with until your mom comes home?" I asked. She shook her head again, this time with a mouthful of peanut butter and jelly. I knew I couldn't leave her alone in the apartment, but if I called the police without a plan, they would undoubtedly send her to foster care within a day, and possibly take her away from her mother permanently if they felt she wasn't taking good enough care of the child, which I already had my doubts about. "How about I go to your apartment and leave your mom a note saying we're at my apartment? She can call me when she gets home and I'll bring you to her." I saw her wheels spinning. It was a violation of one of her mother's rules. But since her mom didn't come home, I don't think she wanted to spend the day alone in her apartment. She finally nodded in agreement. After packing up my stuff and putting it in the car, we went to her apartment first. We didn't pack anything in Maddie's apartment because there was simply nothing to pack. The few articles of clothing she had either already worn or they were lying amongst the dirty clothes waiting to go to the laundry room. I told her we would stop somewhere and I would buy her a few things, including a new toothbrush and comb. She smiled sadly. I left a note with my name and phone number on the middle of the small kitchen table. Then we went shopping for things for Maddie. I let her pick out a few tops and pairs of jeans, as well as underwear and socks at the nearby Dollar General store. While she seemed totally enthralled, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do if her mom didn't get back quickly. We watched cartoons and the Disney Channel. I made us lunch and dinner and put her to bed at 9 o'clock in the spare room on the couch. I planned to call into work the next day and take a personal day to take care of some business. Maddie and I waited until lunchtime to go back to her apartment on Monday, but there was no sign that anyone had been there after the two of us the day before. I poked around the apartment a bit and found a drawer in her mother's dresser that contained papers. Among the things I found was Maddie's birth certificate, which I noticed didn't have her father's name on it. Her mother's name was Fiona Ruiz. I took the birth certificate, along with a photograph of Maddie and her mother. The picture was probably taken when Maddie was about 2 years old. She looked little more than a baby. They were hugging in front of the camera. Fiona looked to be about 25 years old and had the same long, curly brown hair as Maddie. Both were smiling in the picture, and although Fiona was a beautiful woman, her eyes still looked tired and sad. I wondered to myself if that look had grown over the past few years. Maddie watched me carefully go through her mother's things. I tried to make light conversation with her and explained that I was looking for something that might help us find her mother. She seemed to accept this. When we got back to my apartment, I turned on the TV to the Disney Channel and sat Maddie down, then went to my bedroom, called the police, and reported Fiona Ruiz missing. I didn't have much to say to the officer who took the call. Mostly I talked about how something must have happened to her for her to leave her child alone. "Is the child alone in the apartment right now, sir?" the officer asked. "No, she's with me. I am the closest friend to the child. I'd be happy to keep her with me until things are resolved. If you would agree to do that until Child Services contacts you, I would be very grateful." I was worried that Maddie would end up in foster care somewhere. No one I knew who had been in foster care spoke well of the system. I knew I could do the right thing if I was allowed to keep her. As I pondered this, from somewhere in the back of my brain, I remembered that my boss's wife, Darlene, has influential friends in the social services industry. Maybe I could extort a favor. I'd like to think my boss and I were on good terms. I worked for him for 20 years and did a hell of a job for his company. We always got along well on a personal level as well, and he and his wife were there for me during my divorce. Darlene Laster showed up at my apartment about 20 minutes after my conversation with her husband, said she wanted to make a new friend. I introduced her to Maddie, and like the Pied Piper, Darlene charmed the girl in 5 minutes. And vice versa. When she left about an hour later, I gave her a hug and got a promise that she would do everything in her power to keep Maddie with me. Later that day, 2 police officers came by my apartment. They didn't hold out much hope of finding Fiona Ruiz. I handed them a copy of a photo of Maddie and her mom. On Tuesday, I went back to work, took Maddie with me, and enrolled her in our company's daycare center. Darlene helped create it about 15 years ago. I never used it for my kids because Tracy was a stay-at-home mom until the kids could fend for themselves after school. But for me, a playful single dad, it was a godsend. At least until school started, I took Maddie to work with me in the morning, had lunch with her at noon, and took her home in the evening. All in all, it was a pretty sweet arrangement. Having Maddie with me helped me get over being abandoned by my own children. I rarely saw them, and when I did, I usually just had dinner at a local restaurant. I didn't take Maddie with me when I went out with my kids, leaving her with my neighbor, Mrs. Olivares. They didn't need to show her their attitude towards me. Maddie was a breath of fresh air for me. Due to lack of funds, she and my mom didn't do much outside of their home, so a lot of what I did with Maddie was a new experience for her. The first time we went to a real restaurant, not some McDonald's, she was mesmerized, like someone who had just arrived from another planet. When we went to the park and stopped to eat a pretzel and have a soda after she played on the playground, you'd think I was inviting her over for tea. I think she smiled for a week after the first time. I know I was smiling for a week after that, just listening to her exclaim about her experiences. She started teaching me Spanish. Apparently, she was bilingual and laughed a lot when I would mix up words and phrases. Once at McDonald's, I ordered a horse meat and a Coke, and she laughed so hard she started crying. In her innocence, it never occurred to her that most people are not bilingual. I kept her at the same school she went to for first grade because it was the easiest for the school system. I had her birth certificate, so they didn't ask many questions when I put myself in as her contact person and my apartment as her address. I never heard back from the police about Maddie's mother, nor did I hear back from the social service agencies who wanted to place Maddie in foster care. Darlene must have twisted someone's arm for me, or city officials just decided they had too many loose ends to worry about Maddie and me. My cooking skills also improved because when Maddie stayed with me, pizza and beer were not acceptable foods, so we started watching cooking shows on the Food Channel and cooking together in the kitchen. This is something I never did with my kids because Tracy was a great cook, I have to admit. But with my Maddie's help, I was learning and getting better, and we had a lot of fun in the kitchen. I'm not going to lie and say we had everything perfect. We had rifts and problems like any other family, but that's just the way it was, like any other family. We were together for a little over a year, and Maddie and I grew into our own version of a family. And it was pointed out to me at Maddie's school at the beginning of 3rd grade. We were at a school open house one night and were walking down the hallway when one of Maddie's friends and her parents came over to say hello. Maddie's friend introduced her parents as my mom and dad, and then Maddie introduced me as her dad. I hadn't even thought of our family in those terms, and when she called me her daddy, I nearly fainted with incredible joy upon hearing those words. I choked for a second, my eyes blurred, and I had to apologize to the Reynoldses for my momentary silence, saying I had a piece of snack stuck in my throat. Maddie realized this, looked at me askew, and squeezed my hand. She never called me Alex again, and nothing could please me more. I was having so much fun being a parent again that I hadn't even noticed I hadn't dated a woman in over 2 years when Maddie brought it up at the grocery store one day. We were walking up and down the aisles, filling a cart with groceries from our shopping list, when in the produce department we passed a short woman. I didn't think anything of it, but Maddie looked at the woman twice as we passed her. "Wow, Daddy, that's a really beautiful woman. You should ask her out," Maddie said. I was going through my shopping list when she made that statement, so I immediately stopped the cart and took a close look at the woman we had just walked past. She was beautiful, and then she looked up at me, and we smiled embarrassedly at each other. "Well, aren't you going to say something to her, Daddy?" Maddie asked, looking at us. At this point, I wanted the floor to swallow me up. But what the hell, maybe the woman would give Maddie and I a pass, so I tried the old-fashioned way. "Hi, I'm Alex. This is Maddie. As you just heard, Maddie thinks I should ask you out on a date or something," I stammered. "What do you think?" she asked, looking me straight in the eye and giving me a $1,000,000 smile. I was completely blown away. Caramel-colored skin, beautiful white teeth, a smile that could melt ice, and my heart. She looked to be about 158 centimeters, 50 kilograms, maybe 35 years old, and although she was wearing a light jacket, she seemed to have curves in all the right places and fit well in jeans. There was no ring on her left hand. I quickly wondered if Maddie had noticed that. "And would you like to have dinner with us one night? All of us together, or just you and me if you prefer?" "Mueve suavemente, Romeo," Maddie said teasingly in Spanish. "It was a good move to ask my daughter to look for single women in the grocery store for you," the woman replied while I blushed. "No, honestly, it wasn't my idea. I would never do that. Honestly." "Yeah, that's right, Romeo. I'm buying this. No. But yes, I would like that. To have dinner with you both. I'm Cherry Roberts, by the way." "Really? It was that easy? Damn, I should have used that image a long time ago," I said, and she and I giggled. We made a date for the following Saturday. She said she loved Italian food, and Maddie and I had some good recipes. After we exchanged phone numbers and I gave her my address, Maddie and I turned around to continue shopping. Maddie and I fist-bumped as we turned the corner to the aisle. "Yeah, no setup, right?" she shouted after us. Finally, The next Saturday arrived. I swear the days couldn't have gone any slower. After cleaning the apartment, Maddie and I got busy making homemade lasagna, garlic breadsticks and salad, and homemade tortoni for dessert. Cooking calmed my nerves because, truth be told, I was as nervous as a naughty cat. After all, it had been over 20 years since my last date. And then it hit me, dramatically. It had been 20 years since my last date. Of course, all of those last dates had been with Tracy, and I had to think hard to remember who I dated before Tracy and I got together. I think it might have been Marianne Rizzo. The last I heard of her, she was married to the next guy she dated after me. I wondered if they were still married, or if her marriage had gone in the same direction as mine. "Take it easy, kid," I finally said to myself. "It's a date, just a damn date, and you're already thinking about marriage." I wasn't the only one who seemed ready for it. Maddie seemed enthusiastic, too. She was right beside me, helping me as we cleaned up and then cooked. I hadn't realized it, but Cherry was the first visitor to our apartment who wasn't Mrs. Olivares or older, like 10 years old. Dinner went well, it seemed to me. It was a little nerve-wracking at first, but the presence of an 8-year-old is a great icebreaker. My mom wasn't married either. "Have you ever been married, Cherry?" she asked when I brought Cherry a glass of Galliano shortly after she arrived. Cherry blushed almost as much as I did at that question. Then she looked Maddie straight in the eye and said softly, "I used to be married to a wonderful man, baby, but that was in the past." I saw the sadness and then pain reflected on her face as she answered the question. "Daddy was married too, and he has 2 other kids besides me," Maddie continued. At this point, I decided that I had better tell Cherry in a brief way about my marriage and divorce and how I became Maddie's father. She took it all calmly, with a stoic expression on her face. She and Maddie both looked a little weepy when I got to the part about Maddie's mother not coming home. However, the sadness quickly passed for Maddie, who then asked Cherry about her name. "That's a cool name, Cherry. Surely your parents must have been fun when you were a kid?" "Well, that's a pretty funny story, babe," Cherry replied. "Actually, my real name is Marcella, and for short, my name was Sella. One day at the grocery store, my little brother saw a box of chocolate-covered cherries called Sella, and after that, he started calling me Cherry. It stuck, and now everyone calls me that, so that's what I'm called too." "Well, it suits you a lot better than Marcella," I cut in. "I see thick, dark-rimmed glasses, masculine hands, and a firm ass." "Ooh, that's harsh," Cherry replied with a giggle. "You will never, ever call me by my first name." Cherry stayed with us until it was time for Maddie to go to bed at 9. Then she said she had to go too. I hoped she wasn't just being polite when she said she had a good time, and that next time we should do it at her apartment. I gave her a quick peck on the lips as she walked out the door. For a brief second, I thought I smelled arousal, but it had been so long that maybe I was just dreaming. "I like her, Dad. I think she'll be good for us," Maddie said after I closed the door. I had to admit, at least to myself, that the kid was right, for now. We'd had family date nights 5 Saturdays in a row, and I think we'd all had a good time. However, I knew I needed to try a one-on-one meeting to see if this had a chance of going anywhere. Maddie took the news well when I told her that I was taking Cherry out to a restaurant, just the 2 of us, and that she would be spending the evening with Mrs. Olivares. I certainly wasn't going to leave Maddie home alone like her mother did. I would never criticize Maddie's mom, but leaving an 8-year-old home alone while I went out on a date was not going to happen. Besides, I think both Maddie and I were well aware that the last time she had been left home alone, things hadn't turned out well. I made reservations at a nice steakhouse for our first date alone, as Maddie called it. I knew the mood would definitely be different when I showed up at Cherry's door to pick her up. She was wearing a somewhat tight silk dress, open in the front so that her lush 36Cs were clearly visible, and short enough to make her slender legs seem a little longer. She was wearing a little more makeup than usual and was wearing a different perfume, something sexier and spicy, but not too strong. Damn, I totally forgot to bring my stick. How the hell am I going to fight off all the other men? If you think that silver tongue is going to get you anywhere, well, you're probably right, she laughed back. We had a great dinner and had a nice, more adult conversation without Maddie, although it was a little weird that she wasn't with me. "You miss her now, don't you?" Cherry asked suddenly, looking straight into my eyes. "I kind of do," I admitted. "Except for school and work, we're always together, and I don't mind one bit." "You really miss the first two, don't you?" she asked. "Terribly, though not with the attitude that came after I left. I know they're still kids, but they don't even try to see things from my point of view. My ex really turned them against me." "It seems to me that you're good with kids," I continued. "If you don't mind me asking, why haven't you ever had kids?" "No, I don't mind. We were addressing this issue at a time when I made absolutely the stupidest decision of my life. I disrespected and cheated on my husband, all for the thrill of illicit sex. I was a stupid, stupid bitch and ripped the heart out of the one person I cared about more than anything else in the world. It's a mistake I'll never make again if I ever get another chance to love someone like that." Cherry's voice broke when she said the last part, but I caught every word spoken in a barely audible whisper. Her eyes filled with tears, which she tried unsuccessfully to wipe away. I held out my napkin to her, and she gently blotted her eyes. "I'm sorry if I made you go somewhere you didn't want to go," I said. "I've never talked to anyone about it before," she said. "Not even to my parents. I'm too ashamed of myself." "Enough adult talk then," I said. "Let's score this joint and see if you've got moves on the dance floor, Missy." "Missy? How old do you think I am? 12? "Actually, I thought you were 35, but I'm 44, so to me you're still a kid," I said. "Really? 35? She got excited. "I'm 42. I've been married for 12 years, divorced for 9. You're very good for a girl's ego, sir." "Can't be. You're only 2 years younger than me. I look like I could practically be, your older brother." I laughed. I paid the bill and we headed to the dance club that Tracy and I sometimes frequented. I'm no Fred Astaire, but Tracy loved going to dances, so one of the first things I did when we had extra money was take a few dance lessons. I quickly realized that sitting on the sidelines and watching your wife dance with other men is not the most enjoyable thing to do. Cherry was as light on her feet as she was easy on the eyes. We danced to slow and fast music for about 30 minutes before I needed a break. Cherry looked like she could have kept going, but she walked off the floor with me and we found a free table. I went to the bar, and no sooner had I stepped away from the table than the first vulture swooped in. I watched with the corners of my eyes, trying not to be too conspicuous. I saw Cherry smiling and laughing. The vulture must have been a little funny, but she didn't move away from the table. I was more than pleased. She sucked on her margarita as I held it out to her. Pretty soon, Vulture Hash 2, a guy about 25 years old, arrived. He acknowledged my presence, but still turned to Cherry and asked if she wanted to dance. "Sorry, Slick, but the lady's with me. I don't really like to be disrespected, especially by children." I spoke softly but firmly, keeping a smile on my face. I know there was no smile in my eyes, though obviously the guy knew he had broken protocol. "Sorry, dude. I didn't realize you two were a couple," he whimpered before slipping away. We finished our drinks and went back to the dance floor, staying there for about 30 more minutes. Another guy tried to cut in, but at least he had the sense to ask me first. When I told him no, he took it normally, held out his hand and said, "You can't blame a person for trying. She's great." We went back to the table and both had another glass. As we were just finishing up, another vulture swooped in and asked my permission to dance with Cherry. I was tired, but decided that if she still wanted to dance, I would let her come out. She shook her head and I gave him the bad news. I drove her home and she offered to let me come over for a while. It was only 10:30 p.m. and I agreed. We had a glass of wine each and talked easily for another hour. At that point, I got up and she got up with me. I didn't know how to end the date, and I must have looked like the proverbial deer in headlights because she giggled, which pleased me greatly. I blushed hard, and she realized I was in big trouble. "Don't worry, Alex. We're not in any hurry, are we?" She sort of cooed. 2 weeks later, in my bedroom, I broke my streak of zeros in 2 years. It wasn't something wild and crazy because Maddie was asleep in the next room, but I can't tell you how nice it felt to be relieved by a real live woman and not my left arm. I didn't last long, but that seemed to suit Cherry, because before I got mine, I made sure she got hers. Although it wasn't part of the plans for the evening, Cherry spent the night in my bed, snuggled up against my arm and chest. When we both got up for breakfast, she went to my closet and came out of there wearing a white shirt that covered the bare essentials but still looked incredibly sexy. We headed into the kitchen where we were soon joined by Maddie, who let out a squeal when she saw that Cherry was still with us. She ran up to her and threw herself into Cherry's arms, nearly knocking her to the ground. They hugged each other tightly, and both seemed genuinely happy to be in each other's arms. It was almost ridiculously tender, and I rolled my eyes at the pair. "Pancakes! Pancakes!" They were both yelling in unison. "Chocolate chip pancakes!" I yelled back. 6 months later, Cherry moved in permanently, and we became the 21st century version of the Brady Bunch. Even though I was still paying child support and alimony, I was making decent money, and Cherry was working at an accounting firm and making decent money too. Maddie didn't lack for much, although she didn't ask for much. I think when you grow up without much, almost anything can be perceived as a lot. I think everything is relative. And while we may have been a modern version of the Brady Bunch, I think we looked like a modern version of the Odd Couple. In this case, the Odd Trio. We were black, white, and Hispanic, and each of us had a different last name. Some of these problems were solved when I enrolled Maddie in 4th grade in the fall. I listed her name as Maddie Ruiz Rogers. She was with me when I registered her, and her eyes got big when she saw what I had written. She didn't say anything until we got out of school, then she practically exploded. "I could be Rogers, like you? Really?" she squealed. "Not really legally, at least not for a few more years," I replied, "but according to Rogers' rules, you're eligible to join the club." I made air quotes at the word Rogers' rules, but that didn't stop Maddie at all. She jumped into my arms and started kissing my cheeks. After 30 seconds of celebration, Maddie pulled away and gave me a cold stare. I was a little dumbfounded until she spoke. "When can Cherry be a Rogers?" she asked. "You know, that's a very good question. I'm going to have to give it some serious thought." And I did give it some serious thought. In fact, on the anniversary of our first date, I asked Maddie to stay with Mrs. Olivares, and after work I went to the jeweler from whom I was buying gifts for Tracy. Cherry said she'd be home late and would have dinner on her own, so I figured I had a couple hours to find the right ring. It was a little after 6 when I walked out of Jean Horowitz Jewelers, having just designed a custom engagement ring with Jean's daughter, Jolene. After ordering pizza for Maddie, Mrs. Olivares, and me, I drove to my favorite pizza place in a small shopping center. Just as I was about to get out of the car, I took one look at the small but fashionable eatery located just a few minutes away. And at that moment, my world ended for the second time. My Cherry walked into the restaurant, holding hands with a 40-year-old handsome black guy. She looked lively and very happy. I stared after them, unable to move, or sigh, or think. I don't know how long I sat in the car before I realized that I hadn't been breathing for a while and felt like I was about to pass out. I took a deep breath, then another. Then I decided I needed to feed Maddie, so I walked into the pizza place and placed an order. I drove home in a stupor. I don't remember much about the evening, at least not until Cherry got home around 8. She was still animated and seemed to be in a great mood when she walked in the door. "Hi. You'll never guess who I ran into tonight. My brother John snuck into town without telling me, and after I finished work, he invited me over for dinner. I figured since you guys were eating pizza, I might as well grab a bite to eat with him." She stopped talking when she saw the look on my face. "Is this the story you made up?" I asked quietly. Cherry looked startled as the reality of what I said replayed in her brain. "You went to Salvatore's for pizza tonight, and you saw me with him, didn't you? And you thought—" "You son of a bitch!" she yelled at me. I was more than a little surprised. Here I was expecting guilt and remorse, not an attack. Must be some new way to apologize, I thought to myself. Cherry had never swore at me before, but I was beginning to realize that she might have a good reason. "You don't even trust me enough to give me credit, you bastard! I know I lost my husband because I cheated on him. I told you all about it. I didn't hide anything, and I told you I would never make that mistake again. I realize your ex-wife left you with trust issues, but that's your problem with her. Don't you ever treat me so disrespectfully again, or I'll be out of here so fast it'll make you dizzy." Mrs. Olivares was apparently calmly walking out when Cherry exploded, and I watched Maddie slip away to her room. I wished the couch I was sitting on would swallow me up, but no such luck. "You're right," I said quietly. "I let the distrust Tracy had planted in my mind spill over into you. You're a separate entity, and if I can't see that, it's my fault, and I don't deserve you." I wasn't going to tell her about the ring just yet, but after screwing up like that, I had to play my best card. She grinned. "If looks could kill, I don't think I'd be walking the earth by now." "So, I know this is probably not the right time to do this, but I have to show you how much I care about you. Give me your left hand." She slowly walked over to me and held out her hand, palm up. I turned it palm down, put a piece of paper on her ring finger, and secured it with a rubber band from my shirt pocket. She looked puzzled, to say the least. "What the—" she said, taking the paper off her finger, unfolding it, and starting to read. "You lousy asshole!" she squealed. "Really?" Then Cherry sank into my lips with the most passionate kiss I'd ever received, including anything Tracy had ever done. When we were done, she beckoned Maddie to come out of her room. "Look, baby, look!" she said to Maddie, holding out a check for the ring. "I'm going to be Rogers, too." The squealing laughter of a pair of joyous females, sounding at a level too high for the males to hear comfortably, but I managed to keep my hearing intact as they bounced around the room. When they dispersed, Cherry pressed a button on her cell phone and exclaimed loudly, "You better get over here and meet your future son-in-law." Maddie went and got Mrs. Olivares back so Cherry could show off her ring, and the apartment was still Christmas morning when Cherry's brother showed up. He was as handsome as a man as Cherry was beautiful as a woman. Looking at him again, I couldn't even begin to be thankful that he was her brother and not a suitor like I thought. We shook hands as Cherry introduced us, but then he reached forward and grabbed me in a bear hug. "Handshakes are for friends, and while I want us to be friends, hugs are for family," he said. "And they're also to show you that if you hurt her, I will beat the life out of you. Understand?" He squeezed my hand a little harder as he said the last part. I wasn't breathing very well, and I got the point. "Yep," I sort of whispered back to him. Cherry briefly told him about what had happened before I gave her the ring. He looked at me with mock surprise, I think, and said he was glad I was still alive. "She looked at you with a laser death stare, didn't she?" John asked. "Yes, she was killing people with that look. Maddie and Mrs. Olivares noted that they had the good sense to leave the room when they saw that look." He then turned to Maddie, looked her over from head to toe, and said, "So this is the famous Maddie Rogers. I've always wanted to have nephews and nieces. I think you'd be a great fit." Maddie smiled shyly, and then her face lit up like a sunny day. "Does that mean I can call you Mom?" she asked Cherry. Cherry didn't answer as she cried. She reached for Maddie, and they stood in an embrace for a long time, each crying their own tears for their own reasons. Even with Darlene's help, the state made us wait until Maddie turned 16 so we could legally adopt her. At that time, she could have already filed emancipation papers and gone off on her own, but neither Cherry nor I worried about that happening. The state merely sanctioned what Maddie, Cherry, and I had created years ago. Family isn't always about blood and legal documents. And then out of the blue, I hadn't heard a word from either of my kids since we last met over 6 years ago. So I was more than a little surprised when Haley was on the other end of the line. I didn't bother looking at the caller ID and just answered with my usual, "Alex Rogers." "Dad, it's me, Haley," she said quickly. "Please don't hang up." "Relax, baby girl. I would never hang up on you or your brother. Is something wrong?" "No, Daddy. Everything's fine. Just fine. I'm getting married next month, and I'd like to invite you to the wedding." I think I was as shocked as anything. This was my little girl, and yet I was so removed from her life that I didn't even know the man she was going to marry in just a month. It was right after Ethan's 16th birthday when I had my last interaction with my kids. We went to Ethan's favorite restaurant for his birthday. As usual, none of the kids were very talkative, despite my repeated attempts. Finally, right after we ordered dessert, Ethan uttered, Dad, I'm 16 now and court-ordered dating is over. Haley and I don't have to see you anymore unless we want to. And we've talked it over and we don't want to see you. You abandoned us to preserve your stupid pride. Well, you can take your pride and shove it up your ass. I had to hand it to my son. He was a great customer. Although he couldn't look me in the eye when he talked to me, he never raised his voice. For her part, Haley continued to look from Ethan to me and back again. I inhaled, waiting for it to happen one day. It was the work of Tracy's hands. Her fingerprints were all over everything. I assume you understand what wedding vows are, and that your mother not only broke ours but threw them in my face. But she's obviously convinced you both that I'm the bad guy here, and nothing I say will change your mind. But to me, breaking our wedding vows isn't something I can just ignore, like, say, the breakdown of the family car. It's right in my soul, and while I knew my leaving would hurt you too, my staying would be worse because it would crush my soul and make me less than the person I am. We wouldn't be the same then, and you would realize that when you grew up and lived enough to see things for what they really are. It was your mother's mistake, and she did a good job of laying the blame on me. Well, I won't take the blame, if that's what you both want. Dad, Haley said, bringing me back to the present. Don't you want to go? I really do, Haley baby. You know, I've even put money aside for the day it happens, I replied. You don't have to worry about money, Dad. Bob took care of it. Bob? I asked. I suppose, but this is Robert Goldstein III we're talking about, isn't it? There was a note of irritation in her voice, then it changed to pity. You didn't know then, I guess. Mom married Bob about 6 years ago, after we stopped seeing you, she said. So the bastard ruined my marriage, ruined my relationship with my kids, half-assed me financially, and then married my ex-wife. All because of my pride, Haley? Every time my son demands that I apologize. Don't be like that, Dad. I didn't invite you here to cause trouble. You're not going to give me away. You're not going to sit up front with the family. I just want you there, okay? Okay, Haley, on one small condition, that I can bring my family. Your family? Yeah, even a loser like me has a family, Haley. I have a great wife, and we have an amazing daughter. You'll love them both if you ever spend any time with them. It was Haley's turn to reflect. I'd never told her or Ethan about Cherry and Maddie. Honestly, I didn't want their mother to know. Do you have another child? Does she know about me and Ethan? She asked, almost as if in a trance. Maddie is 16. She's adopted. She and I have been together for 9 years. I almost literally found her on the street. She knows everything about you two, what we once had, and what we don't have anymore. She's fun and full of life. She had a setback too, and we were there for each other, at a very bad time in our lives. Almost scripted. Well, I look forward to meeting the rest of the family then, Haley said, recovering from the shock. The wedding took place on Saturday night in a rather chic setting, as befitted the daughter of a rather successful lawyer. You have to hand it to old Bob. He didn't skimp on his stepdaughter. The service itself was held in a beautiful old church in town. The girls and I timed it so that we got there right before the service and sat in the last row. Yes, I noticed old friends and family, but the fact that we got there right before the service meant we didn't have to socialize ahead of time. And as Haley and Mark led the procession out of the church, I received a kiss in my direction. We arrived at the reception in time enough to get a table at the back of the room, which, truth be told, wasn't fair to Cherry and Maddie, who had a girls' spa day on Friday and then both bought new dresses. Cherry's was sophisticated and sexy, and Maddie looked 16 and 21 when she first applied full makeup, any father's nightmare. But they both respected my wishes and didn't complain when we sat down at the table after I stopped by the bar to grab a glass of wine each for Cherry and me and a Coke for Maddie. As I expected, various friends from earlier began to stop by the table to say hello and chat as soon as they noticed me. Then Tracy's parents, Rhonda and William, came over. Rhonda cried as soon as she leaned over to kiss me. William hugged me harder than he had when Tracy and I were married. I introduced Cherry and Maddie. Both Rhonda and Bill looked a little awkward, but I supposed it was understandable. I was married to their daughter of 18 years. Since I had no say and wasn't paying for the affair, I didn't think it was right of me to move around and work the crowd, so to speak, so the girls and I mostly stayed at the table as people approached us. But I'm no fool, and I could see the reactions of many people who knew me to be with a gorgeous black woman and a Hispanic princess, particularly the reactions of the wives of former friends. You'd think I'd brought a trophy wife to the party, and just at that moment, Tracy and Bob, our congenial hosts, showed up. Being married to someone for almost 20 years, you get caught up in all the nuances of someone's personality, and from the first moment Tracy saw Cherry, I knew she didn't like her. Maybe Cherry was too black? Maybe Cherry was too pretty? Most likely. Could Cherry have had a flat stomach, beautiful legs, and looked 10 years younger than her years? Definitely. Could Cherry, with all that she had, have just been with the one wrong guy in the room? Hell yes. For all the things going through her head about Cherry, Tracy hadn't even paid much attention to the fact that this was the first time in 10 years that we'd seen each other up close. She almost literally woke up when I walked over and kissed her on the cheek as a greeting. "Oh, Alex, I'm sorry. I had a little trouble getting around in these new heels," she apologized. "No problem, babe. You look amazing," I lied. "Come meet my new family." I introduced Cherry, Maddie, Tracy, and Bob, shook Bob's hand as warmly as I could, introducing him to them as an instrument of my later good fortune. Everyone but Maddie wrinkled their nose when I said that, but my daughter threw me a sly look and squeezed my left elbow. "Did I tell you this kid is perceptive?" We chatted for about 5 minutes, not saying anything thick, until Tracy and Bob left and the bride and her new husband approached. When Tracy and Bob walked away, Maddie shook her head slightly, indicating that she was no more excited to meet them than I was to meet them. My second daughter, my fiancée, greeted me much warmer than I expected. She hugged me and started crying, while my new son-in-law, Cherry, and Maddie stood silent. I was completely stunned by this and didn't know what to say when she finally let me go. "I'm sorry, Daddy, for everything," she wheezed. "I never realized what you were getting at until I repeated my own vows about 2 hours ago. Right as you were saying your vows, it hit me like a punch in the face what you went through when Mom cheated on you and broke your vows. I never understood. I blamed you and your damn pride, just like Ethan, and now I understand. Completely. You were absolutely right to do what you did, and she was absolutely wrong to not only do what she did, but to blame it on you. How can I make up for the pain Ethan and I caused you?" There was a lump in my throat the size of a soccer ball. I hadn't cried since I tore cartilage in my knee playing soccer in 10th grade, but I was damn close to it, standing here with my family gathered around me. "How about you first introduce me to that handsome stallion you took your vows with, and then do me the honor of dancing?" I replied. "Oh, yes, of course," she said, somewhat embarrassed. "You haven't met the man of my dreams yet. Mark Westinghouse, meet your second father-in-law, Alex Rogers, my real father." We shook hands sincerely, and then I did my fatherly duty and threatened him with my life if he ever hurt my daughter. I introduced him and Haley to Cherry and Maddie, and while everyone was getting acquainted, the band started playing. "Daddy?" Haley asked, tilting her head toward the dance floor. "All mesmerized," I said, taking her hand. The crowd, which had started to buzz louder when Haley greeted me, buzzed even louder when I led Haley onto the dance floor. I knew at this point I was starting to resemble Tracy and Bob, but I had a lot of years to make up for. The band played what I like to call children's music, and even though I hate it, I knew how to dance to it, thanks to being married to a goddess who loves to dance. Haley was shocked that her newly discovered father was such a Renaissance man, and we actually lasted 2 songs. By then, most of the crowd had gathered around the two of us. When the second song ended, Haley gave me another big hug, the crowd applauded, and Cherry and Maddie were waiting for me with bright smiles on their faces. I grabbed their hands and pulled them both to the floor behind me, and the 3 of us did our thing while everyone else joined us. "Well, look at you, Mr. Rhythm," Cherry said in my ear as she stepped closer. "Who knew giving your daughter away in marriage could be so much fun?" I told her, quickly turning to Maddie. "Well, let's wait a few more years. I'm not sure my heart can take all this fun." "Get me started, old man," Maddie smiled back. All three of us stayed on the floor for 6 more songs. Then I left my girls, went to the bar to get an ice jack, and sat down at my table to rest. I watched Cherry and Maddie thoroughly enjoying themselves on the dance floor, and I didn't notice Tracy come over and sit next to me at the table. She touched my shoulder, and I instantly knew whose touch it was. "This was supposed to be our day, not mine and Bob's," Tracy said as she leaned in close to my ear. "You threw away 18 good years. For what? You obviously didn't love me enough." I didn't turn my head in her direction. "No. You're the one who obviously didn't love me enough not to do it at all, especially after I told you what would happen if you did. You didn't love me enough and you didn't respect me enough." "But hey, you got Bob as a result of the deal, and he's a pretty good catch, I'd say. And I got Cherry and Maddie." To quote the Rolling Stones, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you can find what you need." "You were an asshole then. You're an asshole now." "Maybe, but I'm a happy asshole who hasn't lost a minute of sleep because of your bad decision. And no, I wasn't expecting an apology. I'm fine." Ethan came back into my life when a few years ago he started a serious relationship with a woman. It seems fidelity is much easier to understand when you have your own skin in the game, so to speak. He called me out of the blue and said we needed to talk, so I invited him over to the apartment. He was carrying a bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey when I opened the door. "Haley said you really like that drink, and she thought I should make you a peace offering," he said as I led him into the apartment. We'd only talked a little at Haley's wedding, and that was on shaky ground at best. That was over 2 years ago, and while Haley and I had made up, Ethan and I, at that point, hadn't made up yet. So I asked my girlfriend Sasha to be my wife, and it got me thinking about you and Mom. Haley has been telling me for years that the injured party in this affair was you, not Mom, but I really didn't see it that way until Sasha and I had a big talk, which included our feelings about fidelity. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was a complete idiot. I get it now. I just didn't want to hate Mom." "I never asked you and Haley to pick sides," I replied. "I just wanted you to know why I had to leave. Had to go." Over the next few hours, Ethan and I discussed a lot of things while drinking a bottle of whiskey. Cherry cooked a great dinner for all of us as the 4 of us caught up. Ethan ended up sleeping on the couch in the living room because Cherry wouldn't let him drive his car after he shared a bottle of booze with me. Cherry, Maddie, and I sat at the groom's family table at this wedding, along with pregnant Haley and Mark, and our first grandchild, 2-year-old Brent, who sat next to Tracy. At least it allowed Tracy to not feel left out, since she was now on her own since Bob kicked her to the curb in favor of a trophy wife about a year ago. The kids kept me in the loop on Tracy's affairs, occasionally giving me sketchy news about her. I told them both that it wasn't wise to be the liaison between Tracy and me. We were adults, and if either of us wanted the other to know something, we could pick up the phone. Maddie flew in for the wedding. She's a freshman at the University of Michigan, but she didn't want to miss her older brother's wedding, so I flew with her. She, Ethan, and Haley have developed a strong relationship, so much so that they can banter with her, saying she's my favorite child. It's really interesting for me to watch them together. The argument that nurture is more important than nature when it comes to raising children seems to fit us, because Maddie and I have an unbreakable bond that even Cherry has noted. While I wouldn't wish what we experienced in early childhood to happen to anyone else, adversity has made us a little closer than we might have been. Adversity has also probably helped Cherry and I. We both know that you can never take anything for granted, and we treasure the time we have together while we sort out our new life as single parents. I can tell you that it didn't take Cherry long to realize that an empty nest means that no one in the next room is overhearing anything, and she put herself out there in the bedroom. Hearing her screams of pleasure just makes me frantic, and I want to give her even more pleasure. There are mornings when we're both getting ready for work, a little stiff and sore after a raucous night of play. When all the usual wedding chores were completed at the reception, Cherry and I headed to the dance floor. Maddie also danced with one of Ethan's groomsmen, but not before Ethan warned them that they shouldn't mess with my father's favorite child, or else they'd be in for one hell of a payback. I grinned when he said that. I went back to the table after half a dozen dances, But Maddie wanted to dance with me, so I stayed for one more. I noticed that Cherry and Tracy had nothing to say to each other, even though they were sitting within talking distance. "Can you feel the frost coming from across the room?" Maddie asked once she was within talking distance. Insightful. When I finally returned to the table, Cherry stood up and joined Maddie on the dance floor. After a minute, I felt a touch on my shoulder. Obviously, we've come a second lap, I thought. "So, aren't you going to gloat about Bob dumping me?" Tracy asked, leaning over to me. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," I replied. "I know this will probably surprise you, but I rarely think about you at all. I don't wish you harm, but I don't care about your life or what happens to it. We had 18 wonderful years together, and that was years ago. I have a new life now, and I don't want to waste my time thinking about the past, or what might have been." While we'd been talking, I'd been watching the dance floor, and now I turned to face Tracy. And that's when I saw her. Fear. Fear of retiring alone. It was another factor she obviously hadn't considered all those years ago because she thought I should back down in the face of her threats to ruin my life in a divorce. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I realized that she would have tried to crush my soul if, in this conversation, the roles were reversed. "You know I was an asshole then. I'm an asshole now," I said, getting up from the table and joining my girls on the dance floor.